Treacherous Deep by Mr. Malice. Metal groans in discomfort as its frame compresses. Glass shakes and snickers. Full knowledge that it alone stands as a barrier between the crew and the black depth outside, like invisible arms squeezing the cabin with all its might, wishing only to crush the sub like a tin can. Within were 5 derelicts, a term coined for salvagers. They were investigating a signal that blew through the system from 15,000 miles below the tense surface of water, clean, lacking waves like a marble. It took 4 blasts from an orbital kinetic cannon to break the surface tension, allowing the derelicts to go beneath its murky waves. Passing 4,000 meters, the abyss, where no light dare tread, and where only one singular pulse of light may emit. Fiery red beams from a subsurface station, pulsing again. It was still a few thousand meters down, in the pitch black beneath us, perched on the only continental mass we could find, between 2 cliffs leading into a massive and unexplored crevice. Depth calculators still haven't found the bottom. Hidden as it is, we were sent in to find where the SOS was coming from. Passing 6,000 meters. It's been quiet, with only a few low groans from the ballast interrupting that silence. Hideous and beautiful, the ocean is nothing but a masterpiece. Our sonar has not picked up anything thus far, and with a 4,000-mile radius, it's only proof that we are truly in an abyss. No rock formations, no life forms, not even bacterial life. Just our sub. The SS Moloch. As we sink deeper into the abyss, my job becomes far more difficult. I manage room pressurization. Normally automated, but the station wanted us to be extra cautious. After 10,000 meters, it's one button press from instantaneous death due to barotrauma. I've seen it. At this depth, the body is its own weapon. Implosion. Your body guts itself brutally. The fashion by which it does this involves innumerable organs expanding and collapsing. In the blink of an eye, what used to be your friend is now a misty cloud of parting crimson. Passing 9,000 meters. In just a few minutes, our ears will start to ring. A signal I need to up pressurization in the sub. Just a tick too much, however, and we will meet a watery grave. The control panel in front of me started to beep a couple hundred meters up, showcasing a warning that the pressure in my specific cabin was getting too low. If I let it beep for a second longer, my cabin would have collapsed, adding to the weight of our sub and eventually sinking the SS Moloch. Everything must be perfect. Every tiny calculation, no room for error. Our oxygen supply. If the temperature increases, the entire supply could explode and puncture the bow, dragging us all down with it. The sonar. If we lose power to it even for a moment, it won't be able to notify us of our descent speed. Moving too fast, we hit a rock and implode. Moving too slow, and we are wasting valuable minutes beneath the surface. The pilot. His hands are weary and eyes are straining, sweating profusely. One wrong move and we've lost time down here. This SOS beacon was calculated to be below 20,000 meters, under the crust and buried in the mantle. 10,000 meters. We found the station, who then signaled us into a dry dock for resupply and a small break lasting only 2 hours. A mistake, in my opinion. The break may only slow us down. I remained on the ship, telling those on the station I cannot leave until I can guarantee the safe re-entry of my companions. About 30 minutes in, I gave in and left. The station was dilapidated, held together by the bare minimum. I believe I found some gum holding a small hole in the ground of the dry dock together, frozen by nitrogen. Depth gum, too, made out of plants found down here. Eases anxiety while retaining focus. The crew aboard the station, Station Lamia, one of 4 here and the only one at this depth in the trench. The crew were all very calm, relaxed, and overall pleasant. They gave us food, water, the occasional ration of alcohol, and eventually sat us down for a more serious topic. The trench. The widest berth they've found down here was a mere 800 meters in diameter. Our sub could easily slip through, but that was merely the opening. Past 14,000 meters, the diameter never opens up to 800 meters, meaning we would need to take it slow and cautious. They warned us of the wildlife down here as well. Incredibly territorial and incredibly large to boot. The largest creature they've seen can dwarf the entire station. It's so massive that it could never find its way out of the cavern system. The caves it resides in are too far beneath the trench to explore, but a probe was sent in and never found the bottom. Only the horrifying sight of an unknown station. Upon exploration of it, the researchers found scriptures of unknown languages, a sign we have been looking for, a sign of sentient alien life. The unknown station was named Incognita and has been probed only twice. The full station has not been explored, as part of it was burrowed into the wall of the cave. Another threat they mentioned, oozing black liquid, so strong it could stick our whole sub to the side of a building on Earth with only 5 square inches of it. It's so powerful that extraction is next to impossible. They would require a requisitioned extraction mech and have it modded to survive at this depth. To put it lightly, this cave system wants us dead. The water wants us dead. The creatures, the rocks, the currents, all of it wants us dead. The final and most foreboding threat they warned us about, the water itself. It's not water. It feels, looks, tastes like water, but it's lighter. And on a microbial scale, it too moves upon its own volition. Tiny molecules that sink into the pores of skin and bones. The molecules themselves will expand and connect during expansion. When you swim in the water, you can't come out. They happily gave us a new depth suit, only one and not fitted. We boarded our sub and said goodbye. The crew gave us hugs and we left with a somber farewell. They didn't expect to see us again. Passing 12,000 meters. The pressure is off the charts and hard to control. Outside is no longer black, but now gray rocks painted by light. These rocks moved swiftly. "I thought they said this cave had a wide berth," I said to the captain. The radio clicked on. "Yeah, I thought so too. I can't remain mad at them though. I wouldn't want to do a constant calculation down here." He had a point. But this is a lot smaller than they led us to believe. We barely fit through some caves. The stalactites nearly scraped my window, but they were pointed at a peculiar angle. Odd. Why would they be pointed off to the side? Maybe the ship nudged them. Passing 15,000 meters, we were nearing the point of the SOS. With enough oxygen to get us back to the station, and an hour to spare, and enough fuel to get us back to the surface, we were all feeling very confident. The crew had snuck a pack of depth gum for us onto the ship, so we were all feeling more relaxed than normal, even with our ship barely fitting through some sections. The ship groaned a few meters down, made us all jump out of our seats. It was so loud we thought we had scraped against the wall. Turns out the ballast just kicked some sand from the bed. Our onboard engineer screamed, "Watch it! We don't want to poke a hole in the ballast, you know that, right?" The captain quickly responded, I didn't hit it. The sonar didn't state the bed was anywhere close to us. We had about a 10-meter difference between the ballast and the sand bed. Uh-huh, the engineer groaned. Just make sure you watch it next time, please. Of course, the captain wearily said. He looked more confused as he examined the sonar. I peeked over and saw what was confusing him. The sand bed behind us was now much lower. How could that be? It's solid rock with a pile of sand on it. Thank God we only nicked the sand pile itself. Passing 17,000 meters. This cave is by far an anomaly. Nothing we have ever seen before. The cave walls shift. I swear on my life. I told the captain and he said nothing, just a blank stare. Of course, that's a staple of him. He wears drab attire, only his captain coat and hat set him apart from the rest of us. The generic blue captain's coat was nothing to scoff at, however, for he had a number of badges, which all decorated his upper left shoulder. One patch was a commendation of performing 12 missions below 10,000 meters. This would be his 13th. Another patch showed his military service during the fall. One for 40 years of service, and finally there was one I hadn't recognized, a red patch, decorated with a blue rose in the middle with the words Flos Asedire encircling it. I know that patch, I just can't put a name to it. Passing 19,000 meters. We were approximately 1 hour from the SOS. The captain turned to me with his dead glare and said, I want you to go in the suit and investigate the signal. I was surprised. Why me? I asked. He spoke again, this time without tone. I want you to go in the suit and investigate the signal, that's an order. I quickly responded. Yes, sir. Something felt off about him. As we descended, the pressure began to stabilize and I asked him, May I go get a drink, sir? He nodded quietly, eyes fixated on the sonar, which shifted every few minutes. I got up and began my descent into the musty storage room, where I picked up a flashlight, a seal, and a bottle of water. As I turned around, the engineering chief was behind me, glaring at me with similarly dead eyes. You got what you need for your dive? I nodded, shaken by his posture and gaze. Wait, how did you know I was diving? The captain never sent out a mess. He turned around and grabbed a handheld sonar and the dive suit I was going to wear. Better get prepared. We were only 500 meters from the bottom. Then he shoved them all into my arms and slowly walked away. I was trembling, both from that encounter and the thought that we were already only 500 meters away from the bottom, which means either we are descending fast or the cave shifted again, bringing the beacon closer to us for some unexplained reason. 20,000 meters. We stopped just a few meters away from the derelict, crushed into itself with triangular holes roughly grinded into the body. The scene was horrendous. I was alone in the jettison chamber in my suit with an hour of oxygen available to me. I booted up my seal, and it began to whir rapidly. I turned it off to preserve power and gave a thumbs up to the camera. Voice comms weren't available in this suit, unfortunately, so I was on my own. The chamber opened and a cold wash of liquid cleaned the scuffs off my suit and I was immediately enveloped by the deep black. The ship's bow lights were on, illuminated the whole of the wreck. I booted my seal up again and it tugged me towards the wreck, where its perched flashlight poked into recesses and revealed exploded oxygen tanks and cracked glass. After surveying the outside, I wormed my way within through an incredibly large hole. The same triangular holes decorated the rim of it. The steel door ahead of me was covered in that sticky goo the crew on the station mentioned, so I wasn't getting in through that. Luckily, the way the ship was bent showed a smaller hole that gave way to the inside. I barely squeezed through, and before I knew it, I was inside the medical bay. Only a distorted arm floated towards the ceiling. Other than that, the place was empty. I noticed that the door had claw marks on it. Something with incredible strength tried to break in. I found the SOS beacon and turned it off. As soon as the switch clicked into place, though, the lights from the sub were gone. There was a deafening squeal of metal against stone, and at the same time, a rumble began beneath my feet. I had to get out of the sub. I clawed my way to a hole and began to tear through the rusted metal with only my hands. Unfortunately, the metal had cut a hole into my glove. I swam out, searching for my sub, but nothing was there except the dead black. Limitless, I used my seal to chase upwards for a minute and found nothing, not even the cave walls. I felt a current, a pool. The water shifted from behind me, an unknown presence. I quickly descended back to the sub and sheltered myself inside the medical bay. I saw something move, something massive. Enormous teeth and a gaping maw. Eventually it all went black again. My light flickered off, so all I could see was blackness. When it came back on, it illuminated a pale figure in the distance, outside the hole of the sub, a massive mouth with hundreds of teeth, all swirling in an oval. It drew closer and closer until I could see the shining on its teeth. It slammed into the sub. My light flashed off again, and all I could hear were the hideous moans emitted from the sub itself as it conformed to the mouth biting into it. The rumbling began again. God, I can't take another cave shift. It continued for minutes on end until grinding to a halt, and then it was quiet. My light still didn't work. The battery had finally ran out. I could feel the rush of the water as it shifted again, but this time it was shifting very close to me. I reached out for my belt and grabbed an emergency flare. I struggled with the tip for a while and fumbled lighting it until eventually it snapped to life. And before me, illuminated by the red of my flare, a horrific figure appeared and disappeared again. It looked like it had tentacles. I slowly rose to my feet. The whole medical bay was illuminated now. I could see the hole. Instantly, I got up and swam out, where I was met with a distant sound that rang through my body. I felt something slowly envelop my leg and tug me downwards. I let go of the flare and flailed back and forth as the thing grabbing me did. I was hurled into the sand where I snagged a small pointed rock which I used to jab into the gripping mass. With one hand I held it, and with the other I punched into the squishy thing with the rock. It finally let go, and I began to fall deeper. The flare was below me, showcasing a massive cave, something from my deepest nightmares. The walls were flexing and slowly writhing into itself, weaving a horrid shape around me. I continued to fall, feeling the water rush around me, watching the flare as it too fell. The walls began to slowly narrow, until only a small hole big enough for one person to fit was found. It looked like it was excavated. When I gently landed beside the hole, I picked up the now dying flare. As I raised it, I noticed nothing was around me, but I felt the water rushing to and fro. I reluctantly hopped into the hole and slowly descended into it. I fell for what felt like hours before reaching a small cave with no way out. When I hit the ground, a horrific sound bellowed through the cave. Another groan. The flare died out. I was alone in a crunchy pit. It felt like the floors were made of wood that had been burnt to cinders. An hour passed, and I began to cry, watching as my oxygen supply depleted slowly. Just let me die already. Before me, I saw a small yellow light, and it was growing in size. This has to be the end. I'm finally free. I jumped to my feet and stammered closer. On my approach, I realized it was something physical, the size of a walnut, growing, becoming more bright. It began to illuminate something it was hanging on. Moved in for a closer look, my hand outstretched to grab the pulsing seed, until the seed flashed brightly, and showcased the horror that held it. Long, gangly hands. All of its bones were grotesquely lengthened, and a swirling mass of tentacles weaving into a ball laid at its feet. A human skeleton. Its ribcage still loosely intact and its arms slowly enveloping me. The skull was fully dysmorphic. The upper half of the skull was lengthened with sharp, elongated teeth pointing from the front. Below the skull, its jaw hung, barely holding on. From the roof of the mouth, the seed hung. How was it moving? The last thought that crossed my mind, and then I realized that that very same black goo covered the joints and crossed from one bone to another. As its arms closed in on me, its head moved towards my face, and the light began to fade. Station Lamia Prime by Mr. Malice. We approached the floating structure, a ring with a large pillar mounted in the center. From it, a cacophony of electromagnetic waves erupted through the cosmos, assaulting our ship with near unstoppable strength. Our shields were strong enough to repel most advances, but the waves consistently tore through some sections, deadening rooms for minutes at a time. Death-tone plates shimmered in the blue light with a magenta pigment carefully dotting the lower half of most plates. I am a derelict, ordered by the Cosmological Council to investigate this station, Lamia Prime. It mentioned peculiar anomalies that had been previously undocumented were a constant force in this place. Between visionary hallucinations to mimetic distortion, this place covered all of the enigmatic anomalies recorded by the Council with varying levels of details. As a derelict, I was only sent in to investigate and record any findings. A crew of 25 men and women on a small shuttle are to monitor my neurological behavior, as that is the most prevalent report when passing through this area. This lone station was a place of vast technological advancement, unrivaled in its prime. Now, it is a ghost of what it once was. There were no signs of external damage, no signs of technological malfunction, no signs of a panic or struggle aboard the station. Everyone just disappeared, leaving only their clothes lying on the ground. Chilling. Absolutely. More chilling, however, is that the reactor is still running without an operator. Unless they developed an autonomous reactor, which is nigh impossible, then this is the work of an anomaly. The station was in range for the smaller pneumopod to be shot towards it. There was no technology within the pod itself, only lead plating to protect the contents within from radiation. I climbed into its cockpit, and before me was a window, through which I could see the grotesque station listing slowly in a dead orbit. The radio clicked on.
You ready?
A female voice blared. Yep, I responded, almost excited to enter the station's recesses. The cabin around me, laced with woven cloth to protect the contents from kinetic force, began to expand. These were the punch pillows, so to speak, and they grew rapidly, surrounding my body in their grasp. Then came the punch. A massive plume of pneumatically sealed air exploded from behind the shuttle, and I propelled forward towards the station. Above me, circles of lights turned to lines, and the station ahead grew into a vast, rotating mass. I was pulled into it, and I was about to slam into the side when an unknown force cushioned my assault. My window had strings of baby blue constantly crawling from bottom to top.
Don't worry. It's merely an electron field. It will pull you in shortly.
The female voice spoke. And just like that, it did. I was being guided gently into a small opening near the bottom of the pillar, where I was thrown into a room filled with meteorites and asteroids. Essentially the junk drawer of this station, where it preserves any meteors that come hurling its way towards the station. The airlock spewed open and the pressure kicked the door off its hinges, opening my deflating cabin to the meteor storage. I got out, searching immediately for a door to go through. Luckily, there was an illuminated door opposite the entrance, a bulkhead of sorts, clearly where the airlock was. I stammered over to it, carefully weaving through the meteors until I could embrace the handle on the door. To my surprise, it turned without hesitation, indicating that it was recently used. As it opened, I pulled out my plasma pistol, standard issue for all Derelict personnel. Inside was a well-lit, glossy surface with dotted dirt patterns all around. I slowly walked in and closed the door behind me, swiftly jolting back and forth as I checked the room for intruders. Nothing found. As the door slid into place, it automatically sealed and fresh oxygen was pumped into the room. I turned up my visor, allowing the oxygen to fill my lungs. I looked down and saw more dirt, once again dotted towards the door out. Cautiously I approached. The glassy texture of this place made the dots stand out to an extreme. The door slashed open with both sides moving in perfect unison, something now alien to me entirely. Before me was a vast hallway that ran seemingly forever, then wrapped around the sides. All I knew was that I was at the bottom of the pillar, and around me stood flat, dead, black monoliths of incredible size, silent from lack of use. Brushing past one caused its black face to ignite into bluish tones with a blaring sound cascading down the hallways and echoing back to me. The screaming reverberation startled me as it returned and split off into the other halls. Disturbingly enough, I could hear other sounds it carried as it passed. The screen spoke an ancient dialect originating in primordial English. I could only make out "Lamia Prime" and "Welcome" from the degraded radio. Beyond it, I saw a large corridor which whipped to the right, interwoven into a hive of lost knowledge. I began my investigation, only to be interrupted by the perfect porcelain white halls having only one dark brown interlocutor, more particles leading off from where I came from. Dust from the meteorites, no doubt. I followed the breadcrumb trail, which traced the halls loosely. Whoever this was, they were disoriented. Each step into this place was another step into madness. White halls, white floors, white fluorescent lights, with only the light baby blue interjections of screens followed by green and magenta iridescence radiating through the windows. The iridescent glow was hypnotic, perfectly even in its distribution. Wait, green? Thought the star was blue. Taking a slow and cautious step into a small room decorated with dispersed and erratic placement of lab tech, I gazed out the nearby window at the star, which was indeed blue. Looking back at its iridescence, I saw blue and magenta pigment. The magenta was the color of the nebula, so that's consistent. Perhaps a part of the anomaly. Down the corridor, I heard gas spew as a door screamed open. I crouched and slowly walked towards the sound. All was silent in this moment. I approached, peering through the quartzite glass at a now open door with a shimmering light exuding from it. My feet squealed on the floor as I motioned towards it, and as the first squeak from my foot echoed from beneath me, the door gently closed. My radio clicked on, and again I could hear that female voice.
The whole station stood still for a good 5 minutes. What the hell is happening in there?
Stood still, I thought. How the hell does an entire station of this size stand still, then go right back to regular rotation? I clicked my radio. I believe there's another being aboard this station. Dirt tracks have alluded to it. Preparing to investigate. I realized that I hadn't asked about the station, but for some reason I couldn't bring myself to do it. I opened my mouth and no words came out. Made me shudder. I moved towards the door, which automatically opened upon noticing my movement. I readied my pistol and stood with my back against the frame. Snapping into place with my pistol aimed into the room, I swiftly strutted in. Nary a sound but the squeaks of my boots and the charge of plasma. The room had no alternative entrances or exits. Nothing was there. Not even a sign of life, no dirt on the ground. Nothing. Everything was as it should be. Noticing this, my heart began to pound. Maybe a malfunction. But thus far, I haven't seen the station's infrastructure malfunction even minorly. The radio clicked again.
Warning. Magnetic storm. Prepare for electronics and machines to begin malfunctioning or turning off entirely.
My heart jumped again. The thought of more of these malfunctions happening was comforting, but also terrifying. Almost immediately, the magenta hue began to offset the turquoise, and the iridescence faded as a massive nebula began to envelop the station. Now, all that shone through the window was magenta, interrupted by streaks of reddish lightning. Magnetic storms were no joke. They have blasted whole ships out of the stars. However, this one was different. It seemed almost targeted. The lighting slashed through the hull of the outer ring. Gargantuan pillars of light erupted from within the cloud, and plasmatic fire skewered throughout it. It was collapsing. The outer ring no doubt acts as a gyroscope for the damn station. I need to get the hell out of here before the gravity starts to decay. I bolted down the hall, with the rooms behind me exploding into magenta tones that roughly splattered against the wall. Panic shrouded me and I began to sprint blindly towards a staircase. I grabbed my radio, almost screaming. The storm is tearing through the station. I need to evac now. And almost immediately, a calm response resonated from my earpiece.
What the fuck are you talking about, Damien? The storm is oncoming. It's not even here yet. We still have an ETA of 3 hours.
I stopped. No chaos encapsulated the halls behind me. Just silence. I jogged down the staircase I had ran up, and saw that the station was all intact. The radio clicked back.
Are you alright? Your neuron activity is spiking right now. Perhaps we should evac and get a mag helm for you.
She spoke in a very worried tone. With a shaking voice, I responded. Yeah, get me out of here. She responded.
Are you positive? You understand the danger of sticking around, right?
Confusion struck like a bat at the back of my head. What the hell are you talking about, Helen? Get me out of here. I shouted back. Audibly frustrated, Helen spoke.
If you insist, then fine. We still have 2.5 hours till the magnetic storm is on us.
Before I could speak, my throat scratched and only a whine was let out. The fuck is going on here? I thought. Guess there's no helping it now. Got 2.5 hours in hell. Much as I would like to get out of here, I would need Helen to send a shuttle. For some reason, she couldn't hear what I was saying. Sounded like she was hearing something entirely different. I pressed onward. The clicking and whirring of the space station's electronics began to grow louder. I looked at the iridescence again. The pale blue and magenta hue were even. The nebulon cloud that enveloped the station began to grow in size, indicating the magnetic storm. I eventually wormed my way through the facilities until I reached a room with a computer that spoke my dialect. I opened the computer, finding that this station, Station Lamia Prime, was one of a number of stations. It mentioned another, in Belial's Trench, about 10,000 meters down, called Substation Lamia. Belial is another anomalous planet. Prime is where they all sent their data. Instead of pouring through 13 petabytes of data, I instead searched for a simple map. When I found a file containing technology, mapping, room layout, and eventually a full map, I was worried. There were several recalculation maps, one which stated the floor 133 was above floor 142, and one where floor 133 was in the outer ring, where only floors 200 through 220 were. These recalculations happened once every week, and a recalc was scheduled in just a few minutes from now. But between all of the recalcs, I found that only 133 changed position, and was rarely in the same place twice. I checked for a room layout of floor 133, and found that the rooms were under constant recalc too. I found eventually that floor 133 was where the reactor was held, which means I have to hunt this floor down to shut off this station. The recalculation began and would take an estimated 10 minutes to complete. I wish it would be instant like at Prometheus. This station is responsible for sending a few encrypted messages to Prometheus and a number of other Lifehold stations, but the encryption doesn't make sense whatsoever. It's a basic encryption that a preschooler could solve, but the message is still taking the galaxy's best scientists to decipher. The messages are sent to each of the 5 Lifehold stations, sometimes voice codes, sometimes text, and even sometimes Morse code. A dead format from centuries ago. Thus far, they have only determined that it is a 12-word statement split up into 2 sentences, sent in 5 separate messages. They have only determined where 2 words go, and that is send and assimilating, in their placement in the statement. They have deciphered that send is the first word of the first sentence, and that assimilating is the 6th word of the second sentence. They sent 3 units of derelicts to help, with only 2 returning in full health. The station has baffled everyone involved due to its impossibility of investigation. The screen beeped, saying that the recalc was done and that floor 133 was 3 floors above me. I checked the layout and the reactor was on the left, 5 doors down. I practically leaped out of the chair, crouching down and gliding through the corridor to the staircase. When I reached the staircase, I made careful note of the floor I was on, floor 62. I sprinted up the stairs. The next floor was 63, 64, and 62. I checked the floor above me and it was 63. Wait, what? Hold on now. Maybe floor 133 disguises itself as the floor you were just on. Doesn't explain the next floor is repeating though. I opened the door to floor 62, 5 doors down on the left, and I was in the lab room. I went back to the staircase and began ascending till I was back at floor 62, where I entered again and jogged 5 doors down to the left. Again, the lab room. This time I grabbed a small glass bottle on the way out. Back at the staircase, I placed the bottle on the floor before entering the staircase. I jogged up the stairs. 63, 64, 62 again. I opened the door and sure enough, there it was. The damned bottle. Okay, I thought. Let's try going down. I began to descend, going down to 63. Now I was getting frustrated. I don't have time to play games. I walked over to the edge of the staircase and peered up, An endless flight was above me, same below. I opened the door to 62, grabbed the bottle that happily waited for me, and closed the door. This time, I sat the bottle on the railing next to 62, keeping an eye on it as I jogged up to 63, 64, and when I reached what was supposed to be 133, the bottle remained where it was. I looked at the sign on the door, and it said 62. Turning around, I saw the bottle standing there. Frustrated, I took the bottle and slammed it against the wall where it shattered, bouncing off an invisible force. I was shocked. I looked at the wall I had thrown it against and placed my hand on it. A pale blue luminescence echoed from where my hand had met the wall. I grew curious and began to apply pressure, only to see the sign next to the door begin to distort. It now said 74, and when I tore my hand away, it said 62. So that means I ascended 12 floors. I started counting during my descent, passing shards of broken glass 9 times. I eventually reached a point where I was 3 floors above where I began. I pressed against the wall, and sure enough, it said 133. The real sign was slightly above where it should be, and was ascending. I opened the door to be met with the same corridor as 62. Perhaps I have to distort the energy causing this visual fluctuation. I clicked my radio.
Hey, can you fire a high-energy EMP at the lower half of the central pillar? There's some energetic force blocking my progress.
Immediately, it clicked back.
Are you sure you're okay?
Helen said. Her tone was off.
I'm fine. Why do you ask?
I'm serious. You need to evac, alright? You have an hour and a half until the magnetic storm hits, and you don't want to be on board when it does.
I realized that the anomaly is still messing with my comms, so that's not an option. Then another idea struck me. I pulled out my pistol and set it to stun. Maybe the energy blast from it will be strong enough to distort the field. I pointed it right at the door and began charging. Just before I released, I heard a shout.
Don't shoot!
It sounded like it was right next to me. I jolted and released the trigger. It struck the field. A streak of blue tore through the hexagonal field that had encapsulated the entire staircase. Floor 133, finally. But the door was halfway through the ceiling. I couldn't see the button to open it, so I was going to have to go to the next floor. I tried my comms again.
Helen, I just distorted a sort of field in the stairwell, and I'm about to enter the floor that has the reactor on it.
I waited a minute. No response.
Hello? Helen, you there?
Again, no response. I turned and was about to jog up the stairs when my foot touched something soft. I looked down to see colorful clothing lying on the ground. My heart sunk when I noticed a scorch mark on the right shoulder. Looking around, there were dozens of clothing sets laid out. Shirt above, pants below, like ghosts. What the fuck? I thought. I slowly walked up the stairs, passing by the shirts of varying color. None of the others had a mark on their shoulder. Nothing made sense to me right now. When I made it to the next floor, I saw floor 133 was still slowly gliding through the wall, but I could at least access it. I had to kneel to press the button, and when it opened, a headache slammed in the back of my skull. Like a train, it struck again and again. A migraine. Whatever the anomaly is, I found it. When I hopped onto the floor, an icy chill ran up my spine, causing me to reflexively contort. My arms pulled to my chest and my eyes fixated ahead of me without moving. Now, terror filled my lungs as I stumbled towards a large observation deck. Before me were shattered fragments of a previous planet, still intact to some capacity. The Nebulon cloud was far smaller now, and the iridescence on the ground was a dark blue complemented by a dead magenta. Now the blue was overpowering the magenta. This terror was only furthered when I turned around. Hundreds of clothes were scattered to and fro, with the shirts all pointed in the same direction, towards the 5th door on the left side of the entrance. I walked over silently. I had the innate sense I was being stared at. My pistol drawn, I pointed it towards the door. Now, the clothing seemed to disperse around my feet, clearing a path as I walked. Parting the sea of clothes, I made my way to an inactive generator. I placed my hand on a terminal and looked at the readings. I couldn't make out the dialect, but the layout of the readings were familiar, luckily. The reactor's energy output was above 60% with a 10% usage. I was confused by this, as a Lifehold station normally has an 80% usage with a 90% output. But the numbers were fading. I looked forward to see a lever, the obvious on-off switch. I moved towards it, only to feel something brush against my arm. I jumped forward and glared back to see all the clothing was now floating. Shirts above, pants below. Neither were filled with anything. Flat clothing that walked towards me slowly, in unison. I grabbed the lever and they all halted, as if scared to see what would happen if I were to turn the reactor off. One motioned, and I immediately pulled the lever. As swiftly as the clunk of the energy output shutting off sounded, the entire room went dark. The clothing fell and the room was filled with magenta hue, followed by red crackles of lightning. And only in those flashes of red did I see black, smoky bodies, humanoid, standing where the clothing did. I screamed, firing at one of them, and they did not respond. None of the smoky bodies were moving. Despite this, and despite me seeing the bolt of blue slash into the wall, I saw a burn mark form on the shoulder of one of the articles of clothing. I sprinted wildly past all of them, feeling nothing as I ran right through some. Panic filled me again, and the cloud of the magnetic storm began tearing away at the room I was in. I opened the door and slid out just as a flash of red revealed that the smoky figures were all standing around me, with their arms extended. I slammed into the ground. The smooth white tiles were comforting to me. I clicked on my radio.
Helen, can you hear me?
I yelled. No response, yet again. I ran down 4 flights of stairs, ran into floor 62, which now had clothing in the corridors. Disarray filled the corridor. I heard a loud crash at one end of the hall. The magnetic storm was upon us. I saw the cloud ripping at the outer ring. I ran towards the meteorite store, only to be halted by a figure holding the same pistol that I use, with it charging and pointed at me. Another derelict? But how? Nobody else was sent in. I drew my pistol and pointed it back. Mine was still set on stun, but theirs was shrouded in purple. Not a word between us. The figure was feminine, and tears streamed down her face. She screamed at me.
Are you one of them?
I calmly spoke back. One of who? My name is Damien. Who are you? She shook as I spoke, and not a word was spoken from her lips, but she did peer out the window. With a dead expression, she took the pistol and pointed it at her temple. I quickly shouted, "Whoa, wait!" But by the time my words left my mouth, a blast of purple clouds and scarlet streaks soared through her skull, annihilating her head. I looked out the window and saw a flash of red sheared towards my corridor. and I braced for impact. A flash of white. I blinked, and I was on the floor in 62. My nose and ears were bleeding extremely. I groaned and rose to my feet. The first sound I heard was over the radio.
Damien, are you there? Damien!
I clicked my radio on.
Yeah, I'm fine. Glad to hear from you. What's the ETA on the magnetic storm?
Helen, who was clearly confused, said,
The station was torn apart when we left. We tried to wait for you, but we took a mag blast right to our bow. We left. It's been 2 days, Damien.
Couldn't comprehend what she meant. 2 days? I clicked back.
What are you talking about, Helen? How long have I been out?
A moment of silence. Then the click.
Damien, what the fuck is going on? Been out? You went totally dark. It happened like 30 minutes after you left. How long have you been in there? How long do you think you've been in there?
To me, it's only been about 2 hours, Helen. I don't know what's happening. All I know is what I saw.
Helen quickly responded, panic in her voice.
You need to get off that station, Damien. I already ordered for its kinetic destruction. They are going to be blasting it in a few days. Getting rid of it altogether.
Before I could respond, she spoke.
We have 30 minutes to get you out of there. There's another storm coming in. Are you ready?
I groaned again.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'll head to the meteor store.
I began to stumble haphazardly through the halls. When I reached the junction to the meteor store, I was about to turn, and then I noticed the dirt trail lead right to where I woke up. I followed the trail back to find that it led in different directions. I began that way, figuring I had enough time to quickly find where it went and head back. Stumbling slowly through the hallways, I looked at my watch, which indicated that I had about 15 minutes before the arrival of the storm. 15 minutes? It's only been like 5. I clicked on my radio.
Helen, how long has it been since you contacted me recently?
Helen responded.
It's been only like 10 minutes, Damien. Are you near the meteorite store?
I snapped awake in panic.
10 minutes? Helen, my watch says 15, and to me it's only been 5. What the fuck is happening here? I feel like I'm losing my mind.
She took a moment to respond, then said,
I don't know, Damien. When we left, the station was torn to shreds. We would have stayed away if there wasn't another message sent to Prometheus the day after. Another encryption from the station.
My head swam, the migraine from before returning.
Helen, the shit I've seen here is nothing like you would imagine. I'm getting out of here.
Filled with determination, I began to careen towards the meteor store. I entered the airlock to be met with a click from the radio again.
Damien, you need to get out of there. We can't wait forever.
I snapped back.
Helen, what's going on?
Full realization that I was not perceiving this as she was. No response, but I understood her panic when the airlock doors opened and I saw the storm tearing through the ship's force field. I screamed into my microphone.
Helen, it's not real. I've seen like 5 of these hit already. It's not real.
She screamed back.
It's fucking real enough. Our goddamn reactor is dead and we're using a backup generator. We're getting out of here.
I saw the ship warp out. I closed the airlock door, waiting for the hit. But once again, none came. Exhausted and frustrated, I stood up after waiting 20 minutes and opened the door back into the station. I was met with a bustling corridor filled with smoky people moving in flashes, and only in between each flash did I see clothing. Some stopped and glared at me, and I warily walked through them to the opposite side. Doors opening and closing on their own, parting clothing seas and smoky figures in between red flashes. I saw the iridescence. It was flashing between being primarily magenta and primarily blue. I slowly walked through the hall, my shoulders hunched at my sides. Between each flash, I admired the colorful array of clothing on the ground, and during each flash, I watched as the smoky figures walked right by me. I made it to an observation deck, where I sat down and tried to collect myself. Crimson dotted the ground beneath me. My nose and ears were still bleeding. I heard a voice. Sir, who are you?" I turned around to see clothing on the ground. I got up and faced them. A flash occurred and I spoke to the smoky figure. "My name is Damien." No response. I sat back down when the next flash happened and the smoky figure was no longer there. Eventually, a longer flash of white occurred and shrouded my vision for what seemed like an eternity. When it all came to, all I saw outside was a magenta cloud with streaks of red slashing through. Behind me, though, was an endless gauntlet of sprinting clothing and smoky figures, complemented by red lights and blaring sirens. The flash happened again, and I saw the magenta cloud emitting from the planet, spewing from it. Then, another long flash, and everything was white again, silent and calm. The Nebulon cloud was rested around the station again. I clicked my radio.
"Anyone there?"
I said in a tired tone. No response. I looked ahead and saw a dot of brimming white growing in size. Initially, I thought it was a distant supernova. Then I thought about it. If this is back to where I started, then this would be the future, right? But if it's the future, that's not a distant supernova. That's the intergalactic railgun. I jumped to my feet and ran down the hall towards the meteor store. Before I could turn, I saw the same feminine figure from before standing where the hall is. She pointed her gun at me and had tears streaming down her face just like before. This time, however, I could make out smaller details. I recognized the face of this woman. It was Helen. "Helen, wait, please." She narrowed her eyes and said something in a dead tongue.
Morflos Valley.
And before she shot, she crossed her arm over a badge on her shoulder. A red badge on her shoulder with a blue flower in the center, with the words Flos Acidire. Then she fired. I ducked under the bolt and ran back towards the observation deck. The shot from the railgun was now in the solar system and would strike us in just a moment. Behind me, I saw a magenta hue paint the corridor that Helen was in. She gazed out a window, tears streaming. She brought the gun to her head and fired. Another storm. I looked back and watched as it swallowed the payload whole, pushing it off its course. Before the storm could hit, and without hesitation, I followed in Helen's footsteps. I gazed out, shed a tear, and fired a plasma bolt into my temple. Monstrous Annihilation by Mr. Malice. A new development in foreign signals allowed Prometheus to triangulate a specified region in space from which the signals could be emanating from. Though the region is distant from our position, investigation is required. The emanation is from a desolate and dead planet, one which died long ago. It has been given a new name since its destruction, Mortis Est. The signals all seem to have been routed back to this planet, forgotten. It's an estimated 40 minutes of hyperflight to get to the solar system alone, and an extra 5 to make it to the planet. The yaw of my pod and the invisible, intangible tug of the air around me shattered perception, only to awaken my senses in a system alien to me. When my vision corrected, I could see the system in its entirety, with my target being a colorful dot slowly rotating as it grew in size. A blue planet, presumably an ocean. Normally these expeditions are carried out by singular derelicts, but this one had 4 others alongside me. My name is Daniel. The 4 others are Tristan, Alex, Amy, and Asia. They insisted on going along with me, refusing all my pleas to go alone. I mentioned to them the Moloch incident, where a full crew of derelicts had perished from unknown causes. The only salvage that remained were a few metal scraps and a coat, presumably belonging to the captain. That coat was fully intact when it was found. An odd patch was seen on the right shoulder. Well, despite these tales, they again insisted on joining me. Descent began. The marble grew bigger as we darted with incredible speed none of us could feel. The atmosphere was in view now, decimated, slowly rotating as a thick, sluggish cloud over the entirety of the sphere. It was also in this moment that I realized this was no ocean planet. Rather, it had a singular continent. I joined the comms channel to find 2 of my fellows conversing and interjected.
Hey, I thought we were going to an ocean planet. Anyone else see the continental mass?
Tristan, one of the people conversing previously, chimed in.
Yeah, I thought so too. It's clear that it's our landing spot. My navigation terminal has projected our pattern. We'll be landing on the southernmost half peninsula, whatever that means.
Alex, another conversing party, also joined in.
Half peninsula? You're making this shit up now.
Immediately, Tristan began barking back, and their previous banter was resumed. I turned off my comms and began reviewing the briefing. A simple directive was stamped on the cover. Investigate the Lamia signal's source. Of course, an assumption was made for this planet. We believe the source is on this planet. I was sent in more or less to check. Our impact time was approximately 1200 hours, and sundown was at 2200, leaving a good 10 hours until sundown. Along with this, a warning read, "Do not, under any circumstances, interact with any passive life forms if any are present. Engage with hostile life forms unless you are at risk. Return outside after sundown. Shelter until sunrise." Fun, I thought. As we approached and broke the atmospheric boundaries, more of the planet was seen. We could make out details now, seeing a vast ocean with limitless wreckage underneath the wake, some of which piled high enough to poke out as towers. We were now circling the planet so we could slow down to an adequate speed before hitting the ground. My pod was getting warmer, to the point where I could hear the hiss of the ventilation struggle to spew out the now scorching air. As we hurled ourselves toward the other end of the planet, the sun grew dim, and the vast stretch of ocean was now obstructed by a choking darkness. We would land on the continent, something I was unaware of, and we would have a few hours before sundown. The light now skewered through the skies, illuminating the silhouette of the planet, a half-circle gleam, and the black canvas was now being painted with dots of blue, dark green, and gray. I received a warning from the computer, notifying me of the impact. I braced, holding onto handlebars conveniently placed by my sides. Soon, the continent was in sight, and before I could make out details, the canvas was no longer below me and was now in front of me. I slammed into the ground. Such force was not enough to halt my movement, as my pod was made to sustain such an impact. A circular cabin with a detached rotary sphere encapsulating it. I began to roll along the ground at rapid pace, hitting a number of rocks and flattening numerous scraps of metal. Eventually, I pulled on the handlebars, which jutted up quickly. The brakes, you could call them. Flat pillars shot out of the rotary sphere and began impaling the ground until eventually I slowed to a halt. My cabin had remained upright according to gravity, so only flashes of my surroundings could be seen inside. Before me was a massive stretch of ocean tinted greenish blue. Opaque and pearlescent hues were dotted throughout its form, and below me was green grass that had seemingly regrown. 10 hours until sundown. A door had released but not opened. Only a puff of pressurized air began filling my cabin. I took this as a sign that my door either dented or was being held shut, so I used the emergency evac procedure. Pulling a lever that was to my upper left, it clanged down and the hatch above me shot upwards, blasting through the rotary section of my pod. I climbed out and watched as the hatch sailed through the air, eventually plummeting into the ground with an audible slam. I looked up and joined the comms.
I have landed. Anyone else?
I only got a response from Tristan, Alex, and Amy. Not Asia. I used the emergency channel to attempt contact.
Asia, do you read me?
No words came from my headset. Tristan had apparently landed nearby. Alex was closer to the water, and Amy unfortunately had a miscalculation and landed in the water. Not too far, but pressurized release was proving difficult for her.
My cabin is filling with water. I need help.
She yelled. Alex was the first to respond.
I'm on my way. I saw where you landed.
Tristan spoke too.
I see you, Daniel. To your right.
I looked and saw him standing there, a portly figure who wore his weight well, also easily recognized by his modified helmet, which had welded parts sticking out from most ends. I ran to him. Let's go. We gotta get Amy out of here. He nodded and we were off. Just down the peninsula that I had landed on was the beach, and I could see Alex running along it to a small alcove with bubbles spewing in vast amounts from beneath the surface. Me and Tristan started down a hill, moving in a stilted run that ensured balance. When I again saw Alex, she was already diving into the water, eager to rescue Amy. I hopped in as well. The pod was still there, stamped to the ground she would have rolled on. Half of her pod was shredded, likely from atmospheric interference. I swam up to Alex, with Tristan in tow. Tristan grabbed his plasma cutter and began to saw away the upper section of the rotary, which eventually blasted out, allowing a clean escape. Amy was ready as soon as we got her out. She swam faster than I've ever seen her swim to the beach. We all followed. On the beach, Amy began to express her gratitude. Alex checked her for any wounds, and Tristan was running over a scan of her pod to see what could have happened.
Nothing's out of the ordinary. Maybe it was just...
Immediately, Amy shot back.
I know what it was. A fucking meteorite slashed through the rotary. It disabled half of it and made the other half immediately spike.
I tuned in. Calm down, Amy. Nothing we can do now. With an angry look, she remained quiet. The others looked at me too. Look, Asia isn't responding to comms. We need to find her, right now, Alex asked.
How long till sundown?
10 hours. We have some time, I responded. Tristan jutted in.
Hey, I have an idea. Daniel, you and Alex look for Asia. Me and Amy, we'll stay here to find a place we can shelter in. Remember what the debrief said?
Though I knew the warning, I was also aware of the dangers of splitting up. Alex and I are derelict combat personnel, trained to handle ourselves in the event of a hostile alien encounter. Tristan is a technician, trained to understand the past 100 years of technology. Amy is an informational observant, trained to have a keen eye on the slightest of details. Unfortunately, Asia is our data tracker. She's the one who would know where the signals were coming from exactly and how to decrypt them. If Alex and I leave, we would be perfectly safe, but Tristan and Amy would not be. I emphasized this and stated to them that we should remain in a group. We would be much safer if all of us tried to find her. Alex nodded in agreement. The other two followed suit. I pulled out a scanner and began searching for the frequency that SOS signals are commonly sent on. Very quickly it latched onto the signal, pinning her location as north by northeast from our location, around 40 miles from here. We gazed towards a vast mountain landscape, swimming valleys and massive geometric pillars skewered through the ground. A chunk of tectonic plates stuck upwards out of the ocean, the maw of which hung all the way down to the tormented landscape. We would have to hike through 40 miles of crackled canyons, shifted plates that slashed through the landscape like paper, and gouged out mountains that look as if a creature of incredible size has rampaged through them. We quickly set off, anxious to arrive at Asia's coordinates. The initial few miles were rather tame, the most difficult objects being a slight rise or hill. We discussed plans as we trekked through there, eventually concluding that when we are approximately 2 hours from nightfall, we should hunt for a cave or alcove. We had been warned to avoid cave systems, valley trenches, and most importantly, any and all possible buildings that could be radiating the Lamia signals. Yes, we were told that this planet has the possibility of previous, if not current, sentient presence, though the way we were told struck me as odd. There was not a single mention in our briefs, and the only time we heard was the night before we jumped. Our commander approached us in our living quarters and individually told us, dodging most of our questions and remaining vague. Clearly, he could not confirm nor deny the current or previous presence of alien sentience, something that still remains enigmatic and terrifying to think about. We have still never encountered alien sentience. I believe that's what is fueling the Council's interest in the Lamia signals. We, of course, were cautious with every step. There were daytime indigenes that weren't anything frightening or even hostile from what we've observed. Nothing of great size either. The largest we saw was merely a spider, though its pigment was a little too familiar. No, it's the nighttime indigenes that we were heavily warned about, to the point where we were equipped with military-class weaponry. Normally, derelicts will carry a plasma pistol, sometimes a rifle, and even rarer a high-energy point sniper. But we were sent in with a pistol, a superheated knife to act as a secondary sidearm, a rifle, and a flak shotgun. We were armed to fight pirates at this point, so why did they give us all this to defend ourselves against indigenes? These questions constantly streamed through my mind, as this artillery is meant more for usage against humanoid threats, not alien creatures. At least we can take comfort that it would take a plated quadruped the size of a small building to take us down. But even then, the hefty warning alongside this weaponry, what did they think we could encounter that couldn't be stopped in its tracks by this loadout? Overall, we received very minimal detail about the planet. The most we received is that ancient structures are beneath the ocean, visible even outside the atmosphere. But, along with that, came the order to never go beneath the waves. They also stated, of course, that we need to investigate the signal, which was positioned somewhere in labyrinthian ruins of similar ancient origin, and that we should never remain in the ruins for longer than 4 hours. It's ridiculous. Why is this the most hostile yet harmless planet we have ever been sent to? You can't be too careful, I guess. I mean, look at the incident at Station Lamia Prime, for example. Whenever Anomaly was there, it was able to survive a kinetic railgun blast, something we use to wipe planets out of existence. Some say it remained standing, acting as a relay of sorts for Lamia signals. But this planet is where they found the most odd form of encryption, direction, and most importantly, the way it sends the messages. Normally, with each anomalous point we find in the Lamia line, we also find a pathway leading all the way back to a separate place. Each point acts as a relay, with the most signals sent to Station Lamia Prime. This place is the only one without a line leading away from it, but numerous leading out. We received a signal that would haunt a cryptologist's nightmares. Walls and walls of text, all of it without any sort of start or end. We didn't receive it from a relay. We received it from here, this planet, dubbed PAL-05. Alex's voice rang in my ears, tearing me back to reality. She warned me of an upcoming obstruction, and I only now realized she had run ahead of everyone.
There's something you'll want to see. Trust me, I have no idea how to cross it.
I looked at her and shouted, "What exactly is it?" She was silent initially, then spoke again, saying,
It's hard to describe, but somebody really wanted to move a mountain.
My heart stopped. "You're joking, right, Alex?" No response. I jogged ahead alongside the others, and before my very eyes I saw a most peculiar sight. Enormous chains were hooked into the side of the mountain we had been climbing on, and it seemingly shifted, causing a massive chasm to form between us and it. There was no bottom I could see. None of us breathed a word for a good while, horrified, as this couldn't be natural. No anomalous reports came back that informed us of anything like this. Luckily, one of us was able to break the silence, Amy.
Perhaps we should follow the chasm towards the chains.
The chains were off to our left, and the chasm stretched quite far, but had a clear point where we could hop across. I nodded, and so did they. We began our expedition swiftly. Each step we took, more was revealed. The chains themselves were absolutely massive, dwarfing vehicles with one link, and on the edge of the horizon, just below the chains, we saw large rectangular structures. The metal of the chains was rusted. Brown and black chips were tearing up and down the links and appeared to have frozen them in place. No end to them was found for a few minutes, until we eventually saw that they were attached to numerous circles, each decreasing in size and, in turn, decreasing the chains in size. The ends were barely visible through a scarlet veil that decorated the entirety of the ground below. Before long, we were able to hop across. Initially, we viewed it as a minor setback. Nothing terrible, of course. We walked in absolute silence, glaring at the chain's ends. I heard Tristan whisper to himself,
Pinpricks.
I did not think anything of it at the time until moments later, Alex whispered to herself. I spoke. Hold up, everyone. Let's check up. How is everyone feeling? In an almost desperate tone, Amy said,
Right now?
I retaliated. Yes. I heard you two whisper something. What was it? I said, pointing at Alex and Tristan. Tristan went first.
The entirety of my calves are tingly, like when your circulation is cut off or restricted. You know, pinpricks.
Alex went next.
Same here, but it's my shoulders.
I looked at Amy, who evidently was uncomfortable. Eventually, we all grew silent and began glaring at the chains once more.
Do you want to investigate?
Amy immediately shot back.
I'm not going anywhere near that.
Tristan was willing, and Alex was with Amy. Me and Tristan decided to look deeper. The first step forward sent chills down my spine, and the second repeated that. I hesitated, and so did Tristan. As we continued walking, the sounds beneath our feet changed with the hue of foliage, going from a light crumble of dead grass to an almost juicy tinge of mud. This only exacerbated as we stepped further into the scarlet, which only intensified the closer we got to the chains. When we were close enough to point out details, I saw Tristan stop for a moment. I asked him, "You alright?" He nodded and said,
Yeah, swear to God I heard something.
As he said this, his vision slowly turned towards me. I felt his fear. A few more steps and we were ankle deep in an unrecognizable filth. Lifting our feet was difficult, so we basically had to waddle towards the ends. I looked behind at my trail and shivered when I noticed that my trails had fine lines running through them. Not simple lines that appear on the surface, but indentations. The sounds of our steps became increasingly disgusting, becoming more guttural the further we went. The chain was in arm's reach and we lowered ourselves as far as we were willing to go. Without thinking and seemingly without volition, my arm began to extend towards the chains. Before I could notice, I held one of the two chains in my hands. I looked over and saw Tristan in the exact same pose, looking at me the exact same way, and holding the chain. We both blinked, took our turns readjusting ourselves, and then asked the question we had both been wondering. Do we pull? Tristan nodded. We stood with both hands on each chain, turned around, and what felt so natural to do, pulled the chains out from the mess. That guttural sound blared from behind us as a gust of trapped air gulped to the surface. My stomach turned, but I kept pulling. The sounds grew louder as we pulled and quickly snapped into silence when we reached the grass. I dropped the chain beside me. I watched the ground and heard Tristan whinge in recoil. I looked behind me to see two arms connected to a headless torso. Patches of skin remained with the edges flayed, and around the wrists was a layer of skin sewn to the arms and the chains. No legs, no lower half, just the torso and no head. Organs were strewn in a line towards a gaping hole that closed. Once again, I saw those lined indentations, this time following the circumference of the hole. We all hacked and heaved, horrified and on the verge of vomit. Me and Tristan ran up to join the other two.
What the hell is that?
Wheezed Alex. Amy was further ahead, curled and holding her stomach. I stifled my breath to hesitate vomiting, and eventually I was able to gasp out, I have no idea. Let's move. Let's get out of here. We each gathered ourselves long enough to walk out of the valley the body was in. I never considered this, but the ground around the chains, it was leveled, flat. The region ahead of the mountain was torn and cataclysmic, as if the mountain ran into it, against the chain's pool. We stopped just a few miles away from it and we were halfway to Asia. We rested. 5 hours till sundown. Gasping for air, we found a small plateau and sat upon it, sitting opposite each other. We all took time to adjust and calm down, and Amy said,
I can't believe what we just saw. Who would do something like that? Attempt to actually pull an entire mountain? That's ridiculous.
I did not mention the fact that the valley was leveled and flat. Haven't the faintest idea why. I made a log about it. Let's just get to Asia. The sooner we find her, the sooner we find the transmitter, and the sooner we can get off this planet, I said. Alex looked at me with a dead serious expression.
I'm more scared to go further into this place. I saw a large assortment of ruined geometric shapes in the distance, towards Asia, and it's very clear now what it is. Take a look if you have to.
I stood up and looked towards our location, and sure enough, I saw cracked and torn pavement lines, and large ruins in sorted fashion alongside the pavement.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Daniel, but that is not something I want to walk into now. I've seen a lot, alright? I saw Lamia Prime get blown to shreds and resemble behind my back. I've been on the Lamia case since I started being a derelict with 4 completed missions under my belt. This is too much, even for me.
She said. I knew her history. All of us have 4 missions and 4 years of the Lamia case under our belts. We've all seen what she has seen. She's right. This is more than we were ready to deal with. I'm not leaving without Asia. We get her, and we call for evac. Sound good? I asked. Alex nodded, visibly tired. Tristan nodded. That Amy was contemplating.
Do you guys think you can carry on without me? I'm not able to deal with this stuff. I meant to take notes on what we see, and I have seen more than enough. Think I can wait for evac?
I looked at her, then at Alex. Tristan interjected.
You're going to leave Asia? What if we don't succeed? You're just going to go back to Prometheus with that weight on your shoulders.
Amy exhaled sharply and fell silent, hanging her head. If you want to stay, then stay. We wasted enough time. We need to book it to Asia before nightfall. I began walking. Alex followed behind me, and behind her Tristan followed. Amy stayed. The first 5 miles were easy, but we were already approaching the outskirts of the ruins. Each of us were tense. We pulled out our weapons and held them, safety off. Another hour passed. We're down to 3.5 hours to find Asia and call for evac. We saw large posts of metal impaling the ground with a hunk of broken metal and electronics dangling from the top. Ancient pavement that crunched and crackled beneath our feet led all the way into the ruins. 3 hours left, and we were just under 10 miles from Aza's position. It was clear where she was just by the path of recent destruction her pod made. Smoke billowed from a building further down the paved road from us. We could have ran, but our caution was far too crippling. Anticipating an event that won't come to pass, it took us 2 hours to walk through the ruins. Something eerily familiar about them, and all of us reported hearing voices over comms that did not belong to any of us. The only person who did not report was Amy, presumably off comms and trying to contact evac. Asia landed in a building that was now around the corner from us. Quite a large building, and the back were exploded canisters of extreme proportions. We only saw them because the right side of the building was completely decimated. As we rounded the corner, we heard a chilling sound over comms that made us stop in our tracks. An eerie moan was heard, one which crackled over a broken frequency. With eyes widened, we each looked at one another, brought our weapons closer to our chests, and proceeded even slower than before. Alex peeked around the broken wall, saying she sees the pod. As we approached, she held up her hand and said,
I wouldn't go near it though.
I asked why just as I joined her side. The pod was absolutely shredded, with a viscous red liquid seeping from its cracks. Beneath it, a membrane-like mass congealed and held it in place. The mass was pinkish, with pustules the size of a human skull filled with a mysterious yellow-green substance. From the side of the pod, we saw a lanky feminine arm sticking out, holding on by the strands of tendon to the now very clear pilot of said pod. Asia was dead, and in her outstretched arms was the data tracker. We approached slowly, and as we did, I heard Tristan begin to whimper, choking back tears. I wanted to tell him to let it out, but that would make more noise than we were willing to allow. I saw the pod up close, and through the pod I saw Asia's face. A horrific sight, truly. The membrane beneath her had crawled up to her body, encompassing it. Her face had a solid substance with many holes drilling into her skull. None were bleeding. I could see tendrils of this wood-like material under her skin on the side of the infected area. One of the only untouched places being her right eye, which gazed 1,000,000 miles ahead of her without life. Tristan began to break when he saw it. I heard him convulsing and heaving. With one foot almost on the membrane, I stretched forward to grab the data tracker. It was no ordinary tracker. It was the Asia Special. She modified it heavily, jerry-rigging range extenders and tons of buttons to the sides and the front. She even gave it a touchscreen and an analog panel. A gifted technician, absolutely. I handed it to Tristan, the only other one of us who knew how it functioned. He pressed a few buttons to turn it on and clasped it in both hands as he gazed at Asia. "Is it working?" I asked. No response. Alex grabbed it from him slowly and calmly. She didn't want to disturb him. I looked at it and immediately recognized Asia's special symbol for Lamia signals. It was in a peculiar place, just down the road. I told Tristan to take as long as he needs, only for him to speak immediately.
She really was the best.
I hung my head and said, "Yeah, we need to finish this. The transmitter's right down the..." Tristan cut me off.
Do you think we'll get out of this, man?
I looked at him. His face had tears streaming down and his face was red. Yeah, why wouldn't we? Tristan solemnly looked up, a look of fear and desperation as he reached for his communication relay and handed it to me. As he did, he said,
"We haven't had a single contact since we landed. Nobody can hear us."
My heart sunk. Well, when they notice the signals off the map, I'm sure they'll send someone. He cut me off again.
You know what happened to the others, right? I didn't think it was my time. Not yet.
I was confused, and before I could ask, he said,
"Go on without me. I'm gonna need a bit. I'll catch up."
I nodded, and just as I turned around, I heard him whispering to himself.
Flossvale.
Dead tongue. I doubt he could translate it for me. Alex and I started for the signal transmitter. She was still silent, and I could tell she was disturbed. We pressed forward until we got to the ruins, rubble piled onto the base floor of what used to be a building. The back corner was cleared of the rubble and had a hole leading down. At this point, we were on top of the signal, so all we had to do was jump. I turned on my flashlight and started forward, only to realize Alex wasn't with me. I looked behind me. Nobody. So I went back onto the streets to see her standing, arms lowered with her gun at her side. She looked defeated. I walked to her and asked her what was wrong, and without a word she pointed up to the top of the large building once called a skyscraper. When I looked, I felt exactly what she did. The same membrane mass from Asia's pod growing in a huge spread on the side of the building. Pustules the size of a person, and within was something swimming. Only when my eyes followed it did I understand her despair. The spread was ongoing, hostile, and above all else, powerful. We walked forward to find a huge trench, stretching past the plateaus we came from and reaching to a sea of complete red. Underneath, a spongy substance was poking through the waves, and what we saw only deepened our fear. Arms. Human arms. Legs. Torsos, faceless heads, all detached and all dysmorphic. I pointed directly across from the trench. Frozen people posed in terror, covered in the wood-like substance. One of the humanoid heads was blown out, with shards of that substance peeling apart, revealing a hollow center. It made my skin crawl, as the holes themselves were patternized. Seeing them peeled like that only twisted my stomach more. I put my hand on Alex's shoulder and said, "It'll be all right. We'll get out of here. Come on, let's destroy that transmitter." I turned and began walking, but she did not move. She didn't make a sound, and just stood there, plaster-faced. Her eyes were further up, gazing into the sky, and I asked her, "Hey, are you coming? Come on, snap out of it." She finally spoke.
I can't do this, Daniel.
she said in an exasperated and dead tone.
I just can't. This used to be a human settlement, but I fear it was more than that. So many lives, so many people.
I tried to reason with her. It's bad, yes, absolutely. But the end of our mission is right here. We can go for it. We can do it. When Prometheus sees the transmission has ended, she interrupted me.
They didn't notice the end of the transmission for the others, Daniel. Did they save the Moloch?
She looked at me this time, and I could see utter defeat behind her eyes. I couldn't speak, no matter how hard I tried.
Did they?
She asked again. I tried to formulate an answer. Well, no, but...
They didn't save the Moloch. They have tried again and again to destroy Lamia Prime, despite the accounts of living personnel aboard. They aren't trying, Daniel. They aren't.
I looked at her, and in the most inspiring tone I could muster, I said, "That's true, but we have 4 fucking years of experience in dealing with Lamia anomalies. They can't afford to get rid of us." Her gaze turned outward again, and I continued. "We have seen more than most derelicts can say. We have survived through so damn much. What makes you think we can't get out of this?" She remained silent this time. A moment passed and she spoke once more.
Continue the mission. If completing it means you can get out of here.
I snapped back. "You've seen everything, Alex."
I've seen enough.
She quickly pulled the tip of her rifle to her mouth and said,
"Flows Vale."
Before I could react, she fired. Splatters of red cascaded my helmet as shock filled my lungs. I fell to my knees and began heaving, choking down vomit as my mind whirled in terror. Alex. I've known her for years. Her and I have gone through so much as a team, and she just gave up. She gave in to the temptation. My heart pounded and my mind raced. I had 30 minutes until sundown, and my mind fixated immediately on that. I pulled myself up, stammering. I was disoriented and nauseous, but I needed to finish this. I clicked my comms and spoke. My voice was tearing and cracking. High-pitched whines streamed through my throat. "Guys, Tristan, Amy, Alex just killed herself. We need to regroup. Where is everyone?" A few seconds pass. Sounding like a scared child, I clicked again. "Guys!" Emergency channel, nothing. All frequencies, nothing. I even used a dead format of radio waves to attempt to reach anyone, and nothing. Nobody was there. I still had Tristan's comm relay. I turned it on, but there were no contacts. I pulled out Asia's data tracker and fiddled with it for a while, trying to find the signals of Tristan and Amy. And nothing. Just the damned Lamia signal. I heaved once more. Utter terror and fear filled me. I used the last of my strength to walk towards the building housing the transmitter. I reached the hole. 20 minutes left till sundown. Looks like I'm staying with the transmitter tonight. I hopped down, my whole body lethargic and my mind barely functioning. I looked forward and saw an empty room. The tracker said it was right here. It fucking said it was right here. Where is it? Where is the transmitter? I began to panic. My anger rose, thinking this was all for nothing. No, it was all for nothing. First Asia, then Tristan, Alex, Amy. I lost everyone for nothing? I began to break down, moving in sporadic ways, screaming at the top of my lungs in distress. I threw the data tracker forward, only for it to bounce off something and slam back into me. I pointed my flashlight forward and there was nothing. but I heard a disgusting oozing sound with an odd, wet, undulating noise. I moved forward and looked down. What I saw churned my stomach and tormented my mind. A giant, egg-like membrane was wrapped around something. The same pustules as before, but this time I could nearly make out what was swimming within. Against all impulses, I leapt down, my feet landing in the sticky membrane that coated the ground and walls of another floor. This one had a hole leading into what seemed to be an aqueduct. My gaze quickly fell on the egg, which stood at my height and looked to have something inside the whole thing, not just its pustules. Within the yellow-green slime of the pustules was something far beyond disgusting. It looked to be chunks of someone's brain matter continually moving around, tethered to something in the center. I grabbed my flak shotgun and aimed it at the center of the mass. My whole body hesitated at first, but all inhibitions were gone in a single moment. I fired, shouting angrily as I did so. It burst open as the pressurized contents spewed out. Slipping between the torn membrane was a headless body without a lower half, no hands, and where the head would be, a mass of tangled strings leading into the spinal column was there instead. I couldn't hold back anymore. I took a deep breath, lifted my visor hoping the stuff did not secrete a gaseous toxin, and hurled. Instinctively, my body breathed in, and I noticed that there was breathable oxygen on this planet. But how? Hardly the first thought I had, as many more immediately shot through me. What was this thing? How is it transmitting a signal? As the body flopped to the ground with the loud splat and along with it a previous snack from my stomach, a rumbling from beneath the ground began. I turned around to see the sky was black, with only a bit of light shining through. The quaking became harsher and harsher, building ferocity. I knew the nighttime Indigenes were going to be coming out soon, so I readied my gun and prepared myself. As I backed myself into the corner next to the opening into the aqueduct, I noticed the membrane on the ground was undulating and gurgling, spewing up tissue from what I can only assume was the dead human on the ground. As it undulated, tiny tendrils of incredible length shot out from its edges and began enveloping my feet and weaving into the walls. I darted for the aqueduct, which was musty and smelled of rusted copper. I began sprinting with my flashlight aimed with my rifle down the corridor. The quaking began to cause me to stumble, and when I looked behind, the membrane was growing rapidly, enveloping the walls and the ceiling. I ran, bolting down the corridor as fast as possible until I saw a hole leading upwards. I swiftly climbed the rubble to find myself in the building we found Asia in. Tristan's body was already consumed entirely by the mass, with pustules already forming on his person. I sprinted for the outside to see exactly why they told us not to be outside at night. This membrane goes rapidly, to the extent that the entire block was already half taken over with the way we entered being ripped up by unknown forces. When I saw the tendrils coming for me again, I ran deeper into this section of the city. I saw no hills or mountains, only ruins. My chest began to burn as I gasped for air. I fell on my hands and knees trying to get a full lung. In this moment, almost perfect clarity was in my grasp. I looked back to see the overgrowth slowing to a halt. Gasping, I lay down in momentary relief to gather myself. Before I could re-coordinate, though, I heard someone. It was Amy over the comms.
Daniel?
Amy! Oh my god, where have you been?
I shouted back in joy. She spoke again.
Daniel?
Yes, Amy. Yes, I'm here. Where are you?
Daniel?
Was all I heard. Same tone, same pitch, same everything. Like it was on repeat. Down the street, I heard Alex's voice shout out.
Daniel!
I didn't shout back. I was dumbstruck. From behind me, I heard Tristan repeat what the others said, and quickly Amy spoke again, immediately followed by Alex, then again by Tristan. This repeated over and over in my head, and soon more voices joined in the choir. Hundreds, all intelligible, talking, whispering, and yelling. I couldn't understand any of it. I panicked and ran forward trying to escape the sounds, but my running only increased their volume. I was pleading, "Make it stop!" I shouted to nobody. "Please, stop!" Desperate and tired, I pounded forward, begging for it to all go away. I saw the edge of the street. My reflexes failed me, so I essentially tripped myself, slamming the front of my skull into the pavement and skidding slightly forward to see the water before me. My ears rang, and finally, I got the silence that I had been begging for. I looked at the crashing crimson waves, and in this moment I felt at peace. This moment was shattered, swiftly, as I heard the sound of crackling pavement and tearing rocks behind me. I turned around. The voices slowly came back to me, increasing in volume with each second. The tendrils became a wave, sticking into and slicing through buildings as it pursued me. But I stood still, watching as it moved. Everything was in slow motion for a while, and, fully conscious, I grabbed my pistol and aimed it at the side of my head. Above me was the moon, a glaring ball of ashes and dust with a small red spot specked on its face. I felt the resistance of the trigger and fired, just as dozens of tiny tendrils impaled my body.